Okay. It's been a while, my friend. How are
I
you?
know. I haven't seen, or well, we've talked, but we haven't done this. So it's good to get back with you.
Yeah. So how are things?
This time of year, it's always harder, and I'm probably, I think you're in the same boat, but there's so much going on with spring, and I know you're a California boy, so you have nice weather all the time, but it just gets
Well,
it just gets crazy busy trying to get everything done, and our channels I think kind of suffer a little bit from it, but that's okay. That's just the way life is.
well, when you say that we have good weather, it depends on where you live in California. So I live in the Central Valley. In the summertime, it's horrible. It's horrible. It gets up to 110, 112 degrees. It's bad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because I'm in the valley, I'm below sea level. Wait a minute. Am I below sea level?
we're close to
Well,
it.
it gets really hot.
Hot and humid.
But I'm an hour and 20 minutes away from the coast. So we can go to the coast and it's amazing. So I count my blessings there. And I'm about an hour and a half away from the Sierra Nevadas, the Sequoia National Forest. So either way, we could go, visit things.
Yeah.
And I see these people come from all over the world, from Japan, from France, from Germany. And I look at my wife and I go, man, babe, what did we pay? Like $100 for some gas and some sandwiches, and we're here at the coast. But yeah, it's okay. But that doesn't mean I don't want to leave.
I know we all like to explore and get out of our familiar surroundings once in a while. So
Yeah.
the thing that has kind of, there's been a couple of things that have popped into my mind, and that I thought, I don't know if you, we can talk about anything you want.
Yeah. No, no.
The in my neck of the woods, I very seldom hear anybody talking about the price of gas. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I know it's crazy in California. I don't know what it is where you are, but we're at we average $4.50 a gallon for regular
Yeah.
gasoline. Diesel is over $5 a gallon.
Yesterday I put gas in the car. It was $4.99, but that was at a station that was kind of on the higher end.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really similar.
Yeah.
To what we're, and of course a lot of ours are taxes on top of that fuel, but it just seems like there's this and it might be a Utah thing or something, but we just don't like to say anything. Food prices, oh my goodness, absolutely astronomical.
You mean we're just kind of going through the motions and
We just kind of,
letting Big Brother just keep telling us what to do, and
yeah,
like zombies?
like zombies, we just go
Yeah.
and pay and go and pay. So I think it's having a real adverse effect, and we don't really talk about it. I was listening to, just briefly, Glenn Beck the other day, and just because I don't have access to him, but I did away with all my Sirius subscriptions in my vehicles, Sirius radio. And so I've been listening to AM and FM radio stations as I travel around. And I did,
Right.
that's where I got Glenn Beck, but he was talking about these ships backed up in these ports in Asia that is just unbelievable. He said you can't even conceive. So whether this is by design or just by what, it's always blamed on COVID, but we have some major shortages. The chip situation with cars is still just huge. I mean, which is causing the used car market to just skyrocket because they can't.
You talking about electric cars?
Electric? No, just regular
Oh.
cars, but they need a chip in them. And so you go by a Subaru dealership or whatever, and there's hardly any new cars. So then our precious older cars, we're doing more to take care of them, and that's good. But the price of them is astronomical you know, and of course, then you add inflation onto all that. So
Right.
I'm not a doom and gloomer. You know that. I'm pretty optimistic because I think Christ is coming soon. but
Yeah.
but I think these are real things that I just don't hear people, like, usually, you know, you go to church or you're in your neighborhood or whatever and just talking to people, and I just don't hear it. I wonder how you, what's your perception? Are people saying
Well,
anything about this?
I think the people that are saying things are within your tight circle. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It
yeah,
doesn't quite echo, or, you know, the sentiment isn't quite clear yet with people outside of your tight circle. I talked to my brother about it. I talked to uh it's the people that get it, that know that we're in the these are the signs of the times.
yeah,
The people that it's that, because it's not everybody in your close circle. It's those people that are understanding that this isn't good.
yeah,
But at the same time, it's some necessary, not necessary evils, but things, they're impending, unfortunately, the tenets of the last days. uh but then again, do we sit back and we just go, well, it's the last days, the second coming is here, uh enjoy the ride, you know?
yeah,
You know, that's a hard one, you know, because we don't know when the Lord's coming. We know that there are many different things that have to happen before the Lord comes, especially in Israel and in Jerusalem and
right,
here. uh we don't quite know what it looks like. The scriptures speak about the last days in par hyperbolically,
yep, yep,
and parables, in types and shadows. So that's the big question, brother. Is it I am hearing things, but it's from people that don't want to ignore. They're not being passive. They're not ignoring the fact that these things are happening,
right,
and that, you know, it's not all as well in Zion, and that you don't have to be a doom and gloomer, right?
yeah.
Gloom and doomer. Wait,
A gloom and doomer, a
a
doom and
gloom and
gloomer,
doomer,
uh,
a dumb and dumber.
a dumb and
Um,
dumber.
you don't have
One of
to
my
be.
favorite shows, the original one.
You
One
don't
time,
have.
real quick story.
Yeah,
One
no,
time
go ahead.
my wife and I were chaperoning. This is how bad I am. This is true confession, but we chaperoned a group of high school kids that were in a really kind of a cool choir, and they were going to perform on this cruise ship. Um, it ended up being called the Booze Cruise. It's the one from Southern California down to Mexico and back, and
The
you
booze
know, the
cruise.
Booze Cruise, right?
Uh-huh.
And we were supposed to keep track of these kids so they didn't get out of hand. And this is when we were living in Park City, and 90% aren't LDS there, maybe more. In fact, there are more Catholics in Park City, Utah, than there are um, Latter-day Saints. Kind of an interesting statistic. But
Right.
anyway, we were on the bus driving, because we took a bus from Salt Lake and, you know, went through Reno and all the way down into San Francisco. And it was, oh, that might have been a different one. Anyway, we're on a bus with all these kids, and it had the little TV monitors, and you could put in a DVD. And I brought a few DVDs knowing, you know, that we could do it. And the ones I thought were appropriate, and one of them was Dumb and Dumber.
You were showing the kids.
I was showing the kids Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
They're high school kids, but you
Right,
know,
right,
probably
right.
not the greatest appropriate, but that's about my speed of mentality. Dumb and Dumber.
Well, you know, you and I were talking on the phone the other day about watching old films.
Oh
And
yeah,
speaking of Dumb and Dumber, I know it's not that old. It was made in the 90s, right?
right. I think so.
But we were talking about, is it just me? Okay, we were talking about old films. We're talking
Yeah,
about binge watching. Like, I'll go on YouTube and I subscribe to where people. You said you're obsessed with the not response videos. What are they called?
yeah.
Uh,
Reaction
reaction
videos.
videos.
Yeah,
And then
I
I
love
started
those.
getting into them, and I started getting into uh people that do reaction to certain genres of music, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
especially like people of color that are sampling like rock and roll that they've never
exactly.
listened to before. And it's kind of neat
Yeah,
watching the different cultures come together and do that. But I digress off that. What I was going to say is it just me or people of our age, and there are many people listening to this that aren't of our generation? Would you say you're Generation X?
I don't know.
You're not quite a boomer though.
I'm a boomer.
You are a boomer. Okay.
I'm a boomer.
So I'm Generation X. I'm one behind you.
You're one generation behind
I'm
me
50 years
or in front
old.
of me.
I'm younger than you.
Yeah, I'm 60.
But is it normal for us to mourn and watch these old programs like Johnny Carson?
Yeah,
I'll go on there and I subscribe to channels that show different Johnny Carson episodes. And not just because of Johnny Carson, it's because of the old days that I mourn.
exactly.
It was a
Yeah.
different time, like when Reagan was president, and uh and I hate to say it, people knew the gospel was true. I mean, people know the
No,
gospel is true now, but
that's a great
but
point. No, I think what you said is a great point. There wasn't this element of questioning everything,
right.
or
And I'm not saying questioning's wrong,
no,
but
but questioning in a negative way.
like everything now is being questioned.
Everything,
Right.
and you know that it's happening all through our education system where history is being rewritten, and and there's a specific narrative now that needs to be pushed, if you will. And so the history that I grew up with, the history that you grew up, I'm talking about, let's say, U.S. history.
Right.
It's totally, I mean, it is totally different. The way it's taught, the way it's presented, the social norms that are talked about. And the same things happened in the church, I think, is where everything about church history, about Joseph Smith, about the Book of Mormon, about the Book of Abraham and how it came forth, everything is, there's a big question mark. And I think it's not a good thing. In that, like you said, questioning isn't the problem. It's the attitude of the question.
Right. Well, it's funny you say that. So let me give you this quote by Boyd K. Packer, because I kind of wanted to segue into talking, if it's okay, a little bit about critics.
Hey, let me tell you, I
Yeah.
am the worst to derail an interview because
No, it's fine. We could go all over the place. I don't care.
But I do want to talk about that. That's great. Let's do it.
So Boyd K. Okay, so we reminisce. Reminiscing is a form of almost like mourning. In some ways, the past.
Mm-hmm.
I have tears, and I'm watching people like Don Rickles. I know he's very colorful and controversial. I get that, and maybe some people that are listening might have a hard time with that. Maybe they won't. Yeah. But it's the old days where you didn't have a cancel culture. You didn't have a lot of these things going on. I'm not saying that some changes weren't good, but let me read you this. Boyd K. Packer stated, this is a true statement, and it's been taken out of context, not just by critics, but also scholarly critics that are members of the church that are supposed to be defending our faith, and yet it goes the other way sometimes.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Boyd K. Packer said, I have a hard time with historians because they idolize the truth. Now, at first you might be like, well, what's wrong with the truth?
Yeah.
He says the truth is not uplifting, it destroys. Historians should tell only that part of the truth that is inspiring and uplifting. What he meant was not to tell the truth, but I think he meant in certain settings, we're not going to talk about all the weaknesses of the prophet in primary or Sunday school. It's not edifying. I think that's more. What did you get from that?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm trying to see if I think I tossed the book or donated it, but the book that just immediately came out to my mind that when you read that quote from President Packard was Rough Stone Rolling by Bushman. I don't know if it's Dr. Bushman. I don't know.
Richard Bushman.
Yeah.
Professor Bushman. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I know.
Very educated, very well respected. I get it. But he spent so much time on the negative, unproven background of Joseph Smith that I would say 2/3 of the book were all these rumors. And some may have been true. Who knows? I mean, Joseph Smith certainly wasn't perfect, but he never did anything to disqualify himself from his prophetic role. So why dwell? So I totally agree with that quote, and I get the context of it. Why dwell on imperfections, even though they could be true, when it really doesn't have a bearing on the outcome or the great blessing that came from the prophet Joseph, or for something else. We can be critical of the Book of Mormon. Moroni, Mormon himself, I wish we didn't have these imperfections. And if I could write in the language I was familiar with, if I could do that, then there wouldn't be any imperfections, but I can't. And so they acknowledge their imperfections, but why dwell on that when you have another witness of Jesus Christ and all the miraculous stories and the testimonies that are in that book versus, it mentions horses in there and how did that, and DNA and all that, just this nonsense that comes
Well,
out.
and we're finding out that there were horses here. Actually.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Things have I think my point is when I speak about the critics, I'm not speaking about those outside the church as much as I'm speaking about those inside the church.
Brilliant.
And they glean a lot of their sources from the critics outside the church. Mm-hmm. It's funny. And they would believe those more than they would believe some of our own historians that have written about. For instance, another thing, Boyd K. Packer has been a big defender of the truth. And one thing that he said that stuck out to me is that a lot of these professors spend time proving how much of a man, a mortal Joseph Smith was.
Yeah.
When we already know he was immortal and imperfect, why don't we spend more time talking about him as a prophet?
Right.
And proving that he's a prophet more than he was a fallible man, And I think that's what Richard Bushman. I don't believe that his book is that edifying of the prophet.
Yeah, I don't either. I didn't like it.
Yeah,
I read it from cover to cover. I didn't feel good. It didn't have a good spirit. And that's just my opinion. I know other people will feel different, but I felt he dwelt so much on the negative and what's the point? Like, should we do that with ourselves? What good does that do when we dwell on our negative aspects of because we all have them. And does that generally have a good outcome when we do that? No, it doesn't. No. We become depressed. We have anxiety. We have no self-worth when we do that. And we all do it. We all have time periods where we do it, and it never has a good outcome. So why then would it have a good outcome when we're directing that negativity towards someone else. It never has a good outcome.
Right.
But
And like you said, when you said earlier, when they dwell on the things that aren't oh gosh, what's the word, helpful,
yeah, yeah.
uh it they can also twist those truths as well, or those
Mhm.
imperfections, and blow them up way bigger than they were. And I miss, going back to missing the old days, I miss when I mean, they've had, I've kind of researched this a little bit. The church has had their intellectuals for a very long time. It hasn't just been within the last 3
Oh, no,
decades.
no, you're absolutely right.
It goes back
And
even further.
well, when you
No, go ahead.
talk about reminiscing or things like that, you go to I think you can go back to 1970, early 70s, I think, on the church um, library, and get those old conference talks. It's so fun to listen to those, and to see the I mean, talking about imperfections.
Like Truman G. Madsen, he's one. Yeah.
He was an intellectual and
Well,
really good.
he was
But
actually a big proponent of the prophet Joseph
he
Smith.
was, his book about about the prophet Joseph. I have it over there. It's
Oh,
not a
cool.
very thick book, but it is so good. He was good. But um, what was that? Oh yeah. So the to see these apostles and prophets speak, years ago, and they cough and they rub their eyes, and it wasn't
Yeah,
an image thing as it is now.
right.
Everything has to be
And
boom, boom.
they didn't have the teleprompters. They would come
It,
up and they'd have the
that,
talk that they wrote.
that they
They didn't
wrote.
have a secretary write
Yeah,
it. It
it's
was a
just a
talk that
different
they wrote.
feel, but I get it. Um, but talking about reminiscing, I think if we read First and Second Nephi, and that's all Nephi is doing, is reminiscing about Jerusalem, about Isaiah, because that was his last prophet. Because Jeremiah was a contemporary, right? So he had some of the words of Jeremiah, but not all. So he's like thinking about the good old days. And you can really, really um, feel his, I mean, he loves the new world and he loves, certain aspects of it, but you can highlight the word Jerusalem in First and Second Nephi, and it's everywhere. He's basically like us. He's binge listen or binge reading Isaiah, because it reminds him, not only is it a real witness of Christ, but it reminds him of the good old days.
Yeah.
And so we
And
all
he's,
do
in a
that.
sense, he's mourning,
He's
also
mourning.
mourning.
It's a mournful thing. It's not. And Jacob is even worse, who was born in the wilderness. Jacob is probably, it's almost the most depressing in a sense. It's not like, oh, life is great and wonderful. It's he says these days, how does he say it? They passed as if it were a dream.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's just very reflective, very like you say, mournful, and so we go through that. Our parents went through it. There's a saying that says the only thing worse than going through a depression is having parents that went through the depression, right? So it's kind of a little comical, because my parents went through the depression, and so that's all we heard growing up, right?
Well, I
you
was
you
raised by
spoiled brats.
so I was raised by my grandparents. Let me show you.
So you know what I'm talking about.
This guy right here
Yeah,
was
there
born in
you go.
1916.
Well, there you go.
He's passed away now,
Yep.
but
But
he
he grew
remembers.
up
Yeah.
right during it. Yeah.
And we weren't allowed to waste food.
There you go.
I'd get spanked if I threw food away without asking first,
Yep.
you know,
You
or if
did
I
the
didn't eat my
thing
vegetables.
where if the bar of soap got too small, you put it in a nylon or something.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember
Or
that?
rolling the toothpaste up all the
Rolling
way.
the toothpaste right to the end, and you never had paper plates and all that stuff. Everything was reusable, and turning light switches off. My goodness, if I left a light switch on,
Right.
that was not a
Bad
good thing.
idea.
It was not a
Bad,
good
bad
thing.
stuff.
So, so that generation is basically gone. My dad is still alive. He was born in 27, and he'll be 95 this year in a couple of months. And so that generation that remembers vividly the Depression, and he lived on a small farm, raising potatoes and herding sheep, and lived in a little, or his bedroom was a little shack separate from the house.
So were you the youngest of your?
I'm the youngest.
Okay.
I have 3 older sisters.
What year was your dad born?
He was born in 27.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah.
so he's 10 or 12 years younger than your grandfather.
And is he still alive?
And he's still alive. He's 90. He'll be 95 this year.
Wow.
Yeah, 95 this
Wow.
year.
I don't know if you said that already. I'm sorry.
No, yeah. And so he, in fact, I just visited him Sunday, and his memory's going and stuff, but his long-term memory is better than his short-term memory.
Right.
But my point is we are separating from that just because of the years they're going by, and we have these different generations. You named them. We have the boomers, the X, the Z, or no, not X. Yeah, X generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and these are all just little labels, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
You have the baby boomers, and then you even have second boomers, which are like were born in the 50s.
That's probably me. I was born in 57.
Yeah, so you were more you were in high school in the 70s, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you've got those, and then you've got Generation X, which is me. I was born in 71. And then you have millennials, and then you have
Millennials. That's the one. Yeah.
Right. And then you have Generation Z, which are interesting.
Yeah.
To say the least, and good people. They're actually saying that Generation Z might be more conservative than the millennials.
Yeah.
They're getting tired of the cancel culture. They're getting tired of the political correctness. They're getting tired of the saying that black is white and white is black, or good is evil, evil good. And that's the same thing in the scriptures. We talk about the pride cycle in the Book of Mormon, and you're talking about generations that change. You've got the World War II generation, and then it's always those who had it really hard.
Yeah.
And provide. They were finally able to provide for their children.
Yep.
And then the children those next generation, they didn't have it as hard. They didn't have to struggle. So maybe that's that same kind of pride cycle in the Book of Mormon.
That is such a great insight. I love that insight. I think you're absolutely right. It's you want things better for your children, so that what we call the greatest generation now that's passing away, they wanted a better thing, but in turn comes with it the absence of struggle, which really creates strength, and then it just continues and continues. And you're exactly right. It's that same cycle. That's a great insight. I love that. Great insight.
Yeah, there are a lot of I guess likening the scriptures unto yourself and unto your own life and into your environment. can have many different, you can look at it in many different ways
Yeah.
of likening the scriptures. Hey, the other thing I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, I had a lot to say about critics, but I think maybe I'll abandon that. I don't know if you want to. We can talk about it more, but I've been thinking a lot about the sacrament lately. I don't know why, but I've been just the symbols and the symbolism, and the types, the shadows, the emblems, the tokens, things that I didn't realize. And you might laugh at me, but do you know that I only realized a couple years ago when I'm sitting in sacrament and I'm looking at and I think we've talked about this before, the sheet over the bread and water. I didn't know how much it looked like a body underneath the shroud, almost like Christ.
The Shroud of Turin. I think of the Shroud of Turin every
Doesn't
time.
it look like Christ laying
Exactly.
on the
And the trays kind of, you're exactly right.
the body of Christ.
The body of Christ is literally on the altar.
Right.
On the altar.
And the other thing I was thinking about too, and I promise these aren't things that I looked up. I really were thinking about them.
Yeah, it just came in. Yeah.
And it's neat how these things, when you're in tune with the spirit, or you're trying to be, you don't have to be perfect, but when you're just trying to be, how they come to you, and they come to you when you attend the temple also. But the bread and the water, remember we would teach about 2 parts of the atonement, right? Well, there's 2 parts of the sacrament. And then I thought about the blood is the spiritual, the suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane, the atonement he suffered there for our sins. The bread is is the resurrection, where he suffered so that we can all live again physically. I don't know. Did that ever?
Yeah. In fact, there's a really good scripture, and it is at the Last Supper. And he said, "This is my, take, eat. This is my body." And there's no exception for who gets that blessing. But the blood, he says, "And this is my blood for as many as will repent." So it's like body for all, blood for many. Let me see.
So that's nothing new.
It's nothing new, but when you,
to me, I'm going, oh wow, I got a new thing here. And
no, because when we discover things, I think it's what the prophet President Nelson said, that we become a church. He didn't. This is my interpretation of what he said. We become a people of lazy learning. Right. We look up quick thing on this, or we go to some search engine, and we get it, but it doesn't become here. But when we're sitting in a sacrament meeting and we're contemplating, and all of a sudden an insight comes to us, we own it. That's as if it's original thought, because it wasn't us just Googling or going on the church website and calling up something and going boom. Those are quickly forgotten. They're not internalized. And I think you're exactly right. And let me see if I can find that really quick.
And there's a lot more, like, while you're looking that up, I was just say, the symbolisms, they're everywhere. And we don't pay attention to them right away. Like I didn't.
Okay, I found it. But
okay, go ahead.
So here it says, and as they were eating, and this is the last, we call it the Last Supper, but in essence, it was the first supper, and it was Passover. So I think one of the reasons why we're so focused on the sacrament right now is because we just got through studying in Come Follow Me,
maybe that's what it is, right?
And I think tying those together, it's just so cool. So as they were eating, Jesus, I'm in Matthew 26, verse 26. He took the bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body."
And it's interesting. Let me keep
yeah.
reading, but let me just add something while
Yeah.
you're reading. And that bread represents that everyone unconditionally will live again.
That's exactly, sorry.
The physical resurrection of Jesus Christ.
That's exactly right.
However, the second part is conditional. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then or he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, drink ye all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Now, isn't that interesting?
Awesome. Yeah.
And if you go to the Joseph Smith translation, he goes, for as many as repent. So it doesn't say for many, it says for as many as, let's see. And he brake it and blessed it and gave it to his disciples and said, take, eat, this is a remnant of my body, which I give as a ransom for you. No condition, it's everybody. That's the food. And then
the bread.
The bread, sorry. Yeah.
Right.
And I don't have the.
Yeah, and I didn't.
Anyway.
I know it's so simple. It's simplicity, right? I mean, duh. You know, you could say duh. Of course, it's the atonement. But when you think about it, I never thought about. I never correlated the two together.
Total confession on my part too. I never understood why I said this in a video or a thing I did a while back, but I was always wondering, why are they showing the 10 Commandments at Easter? What is, I mean, I just was like, what does that have to do with Jesus?
Right.
And now, I'm like, well, yeah, it has everything, because the Passover and the Passover lamb that was slaughtered, and the blood of protection.
Right.
And then the lamb that was then consumed could not have a broken bone, which was a fulfillment for Christ and his crucifixion. Remember, they broke the legs of the two thieves just to finish them off, so they couldn't support their weight. And they were going to break Christ's legs, and they didn't do it.
Right. Right.
And that's when they put the soldier put the
spear in the water. Yeah.
And the water came out and blood.
Right.
That was a fulfillment of prophecy. Everything was a fulfillment of prophecy. The very Passover meal was all in similitude of Christ. And so the whole experience of Israel coming out of bondage, out of Egypt, and the Passover, and then that was supposed to continue, the Passover, which it did through the sacrament, in remembrance. So our sacrament goes backwards, remembering what he did for us. For the children of Israel, it went forward to show what he was going to do.
Right.
Yeah. So really good stuff.
I wanted to read. Let me just say this. There are many, many others, and I didn't write them down. I did look up some later, and I was like, wow, I thought about a couple of these, and I'm not boasting. I'm just saying that a lot of us will have these little personal revelations, and it's neat to find out that others are having the same.
Yes.
That
Isn't
you're
cool?
Thinking of the same symbolism.
Yeah.
That means it's true. That means that the symbolism and the tokens and the signs and the parables and the remembrance and the witness and the testimony and the types and the shadows are real. They're real. And I looked up even the sacrament of the Catholic Church, and I'm not bashing on the Catholic Church, but it wasn't anything to do with they don't really teach two parts of an atonement, and it had a completely different meaning. It was like the marriage of the lamb or something like that. I can't remember. Yeah. And I shouldn't talk too much about it, because I really don't know much about it, and I might be a little bit wrong. But the sacrament that we take is dead on, spot on, in similitude of the atonement of his sacrifice.
Right.
The other thing, and it's neat, the shroud or whatever you call it, you know, the sacrament table is him
Yeah.
laying in the sepulcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then my stake president friend, I was talking to him the day before yesterday, and we were talking about this, and I said, well, who are the priests blessing the sacrament? And I said, maybe they represent the angels that opened the tomb. You know, I don't know. Or was there one angel? I don't remember.
One account says
That
one
could be
angel.
wrong.
One account says one angel, and one account says two. And I like to think of it as two witnesses.
Out of the mouth of two or three witnesses
two or
shall
three
every
witnesses
word be established.
Mm-hmm. So I like that there were two. We send missionaries out 2 by 2, right?
Yeah.
To testify, one to back up the other. So I love that.
Well,
so
and
good.
then let me read this, Moses chapter 6, verse 63 in the Pearl of Great Price. And behold, all things have their likeness, and all things are created and made to bear record of me, both things which are temporal and things which are spiritual. Things, the bread being the temporal, right? And the blood being the spiritual. Things which are in the heavens above, and things which are on the earth, and things which are in the earth, and things which are under the earth, both above and beneath, all things bear record of me. In other words, there are types, shadows, symbols, and emblems everywhere.
Everywhere.
I'm still trying to figure out the endowment. I figured that out.
You know,
I think hard for me.
I totally agree, and I think the one thing that's helped me, not that I learn every time I go, but really from the endowment to the sealing, or excuse me, from baptism to the sealing ordinance is the endowment, and for me, and once I put my head around that, and actually did several times, I did all those ordinances in the same day, from baptism to not for the same person, but I did that ordinance.
Right. Washing and anointings.
Mm-hmm. Initiatory, and then the endowment, and then the sealing. And I did that a few times. And things became so much more clear. But, you know, we'll go and do initiatory, or, you know, because, you know, we have to make a living. We have to do stuff. And so we don't have a ton of time. And then another time we'll go do an endowment, and it chops it up to where it makes it less understandable.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
You see what I mean? But when you can do it as a flow, it's almost like sometimes I get more out of the scriptures when I just listen to them while I'm walking, because you get the flow of it. You might not get details, and you can't take notes and stuff, but you get a flow of things. And I think that's what's helpful, because in all reality, we don't renew covenants in the temple. We go through one time for ourselves, and then the other times we're going through someone else who's passed on, and we can be reminded, but that baptismal covenant and the sacrament subsequent after that, we get to partake the sacrament. My understanding is that sacrament is renewing all the saving ordinances that you've participated in. So you're actually renewing temple covenants at the sacrament table.
Wow, that's profound, brother.
And
I haven't looked at it like that.
I think that's where we can really start internalizing. Oh, dang it.
Yeah, they got a cat or the mailman or something.
Yeah. But we can start to figure these things out. Hey, could we pause for just 1 second?
Yeah.
I just have to go grab the door.
Go ahead.
Quick. Okay.
I'll edit this part out.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
I'll
cut that part out anyway.
Okay, I had to sign for a FedEx package. So looking at every saving ordinance as one package deal helped me to understand each individual one better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Like the flow, like you're talking about it
The
flowing.
flow.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing when you were, this is kind of going backwards, but when you were
No,
talking,
no, that's fine.
is that okay, about the
No, I
critic?
just wanted to hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I want to talk one more about the sacrament, but just as I'm thinking about it, and you touched on this, it's not the critics in outside of the of our faith. We will, everyone will always have that, and that actually empowers us, I think. But the critics within, and I've often thought that the large and spacious building, I know it says it represents the world, and I do agree with that. The interpretation that Nephi had of Lehi's vision. But to me, the world pointing their finger at me and mocking me has very little effect. I could really care less about what the world has to say.
Right.
But if it's someone that I love and respect that's pointing their finger at me, that makes you kind of question, and you're looking at yourself holding on to the iron rod, and you're looking at someone you love and respect, and you're going, well, what the heck, you know? So,
well, let me read you something real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, go. Okay.
No, I want you to.
In regards to what, because I do have a lot of material to talk about, but I've kind of been on a critic kick lately, I think, because we need to know what's going on, and we need to understand that in spite of what you might think when you're sending your children to BYU, they're going to run into things that you probably, if you don't know what's going on, if you're naive to the fact, if you think that every professor there has your child's testimony in their best interest, then you might be highly mistaken there. Joseph F. Smith made a statement. It has not been by the wisdom of man that this people have been directed in their course until the present. It has been by the wisdom of him who is above man, and whose knowledge is greater than that of man, and whose power is above the power of man. The hand of the Lord may not be visible to all. There may be many who cannot discern the workings of God's will in the progress and development of this great latter-day work, but there are those who see in every hour and in every moment of the existence of the church, from its beginning until now, the overruling almighty hand of him who sent his only begotten son to the world to become a sacrifice for the sin of the world. He was talking about the critics. This was, there's a really good talk called "The Mantle is Far, Far Greater Than the Intellect." And the reason he said that is it was in response. He says, if we do not keep this constantly in mind, that the Lord directs his church, we may lose our way in the world of intellectual and scholarly research. There are people that are teaching in our church, Scott, that the Book of Mormon, its historicity is not true, but that it's a good narrative. There's good stories like Aesop's fables, or Greek mythology. But then you have to throw out Moroni being coming to Joseph Smith, that Jesus Christ came to the Americas. It goes on and on, that Lehi didn't exist, you know.
I know. So frustrating. I'm glad. I know you've interviewed him, and I've talked to him a time or two, but Greg Madsen with Quick Media, I think is his name of his. And he's been a champion of pointing out some of the stuff going on at BYU and whatnot. The one thing that I was disheartened with, because it really, a book that I typically don't read a lot of books from Deseret Book or that have been put out. I like resource books. I like those, but if it's somebody's opinion on something, it's just not my thing. My wife reads them all and loves them. So I'm not being critical.
But she's a person of faith.
she's a person of faith, and she loves
She
to
looks
read.
for the positive and the faith promoting
Yeah,
aspects
yeah.
of everything.
But one of the books that came out years ago that really changed me was Miracle of Forgiveness. And that's no longer a Deseret book. It's not.
That's one of my favorite books.
It's one of my favorite books. It changed me. I felt like, not that I've ever been to a boot camp, but the theory of a boot camp is to tear you down so they can build you back up to
Right.
be a soldier, right? That book tore me down and then gave me a basis to build up and have this faith in Christ and his atonement. And it changed me as a young man. And I know there's some things in there that aren't politically correct and aren't exactly how people feel comfortable in talking about things, especially morality and whatnot. But I think I just, you talk about reminiscing and you talk about critics, and I just think, why would we take that book out? And maybe it was just for our generation. I don't know, but to see that a book like that would be taken out, and then a book that would be introduced that would promote, critical race theory and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
I think you're right. People need to know, and very few members of the church know what's going on, and so they assume that everything that you're going to get at BYU, everything you're going to get at Deseret Book has been approved by the prophet, and it's doctrinally sound and everything. And that's just not the case.
No, it's not. And I think we're starting to be aware that sorry, my cat is meowing like crazy. Can you hear?
I couldn't, but I'm partially deaf. So
I don't know if the brethren, look, they have control. They are running things. God is running things. And I think the brethren are basically showing us that the Lord is in control.
Exactly.
They might not be able to micromanage all the, I don't know if we call them auxiliaries anymore, or the
organizations,
the organizations of the church, even the secular, not secular, but the temporal organization, like the communications department.
Mission department.
Yeah. Did I tell you, though, my stake president friend was at I don't want to name drop or anything because he told me this in confidentiality, but I'm going to say it anyway. He was at a meeting recently, and there was an area authority there, right? I think you call them area authorities, right?
Yeah. Area 70 or area authority. Yeah.
It was a leadership meeting with stake presidents, I think, and maybe bishops. But some sister from the communications department got up and gave a talk, and she said something about the LGBTQ community that didn't resonate properly. And it wasn't just about inclusion, but it was a little bit more than just inclusion,
Yeah.
And the area authority got up and chastised her and reprimanded her and said, no, that's not doctrinal. That's not what we believe. And it was, defending the family and the proclamation of to the world, the family,
Yeah.
Which I think is going to be a bigger, much magnified document than it ever has been in the past. The other thing, can I read something real quick?
Oh, please.
Boyd K. Packer stated, "In the mantle is far, far greater than the intellect." I've been dissecting this talk like crazy. Boyd K. Packer was awesome. He was hated by a lot, but loved by a lot too.
Yeah.
He talks about, he says, this problem has affected some of those who have taught and have written about the history of the church. He's talking about the members of the church, the professors that write about the history. These professors say of themselves that religious faith has little influence on Mormon scholars. They say this because obviously they are not simply Latter-day Saints, but are also intellectuals trained for the most part, in secular institutions. They would that some historians who are Latter-day Saints write history as they were taught in graduate school rather than as Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
And then he goes, if we are not careful, very careful, and if we are not wise, very wise, we first leave out of our professional study the things of the spirit. The next step soon follows. We leave the spiritual things out of our lives.
So good. So
yeah.
good.
And,
Well,
and
and I love President Oak's talk in conference too, reaffirming the validity and the doctrinal basis of that proclamation to family, and because, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that is going to be a huge focal point, because the destruction of the family and every aspect of the family is really the core of what Satan. It's the most effective way that Satan can get his way, is by destroying the family,
right.
and that's the structure of it. That's the identity of a male and a female, and it's so. The church has to be so careful in how they say things, or they'll be taken off every social media platform, and that's one reason I feel like they have to really be careful, because the Lord is allowing them to use those platforms to gather in as many people as possible before the second coming, and during, I think, during Christ's reign. But in the meantime, evil people control those platforms, and you just have to be so careful. I mean, you and I have to speak in code on YouTube,
right.
because we want to stay on the platform. So we can't just say just kind of really common things.
We could say Gadianton robbers, because they don't know who Gadianton robbers are.
That's right. That's exactly.
They
right.
might know who Gadianton robbers are now. It's been said so much.
Right. But yeah, it's an interesting time we live in, and a balancing. And I think more than ever, we have to really have our own testimony of all these things, because it's just going to get more and more intense as far as people that we trust, people within. It's like I said, I don't really care about what the world has to say. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It doesn't have an influence that it might have had when I was younger, but I'm still influenced by people that I, love and trust, or the organization maybe that they represent, like BYU. And you have to really go, now, wait a minute, what they're saying, does that really ring true? And you have to really have the spiritual sensitivity to decipher and to determine that. So that's the time we live in.
Is it really more transparency now than it was back in the 50s and 60s or 70s, 80s? Or is it, or are they, in other words, why can't we believe? I still believe, what am I trying to say here? I still believe in people like J. Reuben Clark and what was his name? Hugh B. Brown
yeah.
And Bruce R. McConkie and Hugh Nibley and some of those older scholars.
Yeah.
And we talked about Truman Madsen, and we can go on and on. I think they got it right. I don't necessarily think that some of these new scholars, up and coming guys, are shedding more light on something that we didn't already have. I think we had more of the truth than what they might be alluding to, that we need more transparency on these things. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It reminds me of a story, and this might be what you're driving at. on the back of the church news, they used to have these like inspirational stories. And I haven't seen a church news for a while, but it used to be in the Deseret News newspaper, and you'd get it on a Saturday, and it had church news. They might not even have it anymore, but because I haven't taken a newspaper in I don't know how long. But anyway, these inspirational stories, and one of the stories talked about a stake that was in the state of Wyoming back around the turn of the century, maybe a little bit later, maybe like 1920s or something like that. But so the turn of the 1900s, and the stake covered the whole state of Wyoming, and there was only a few phones in the whole stake. So the stake presidency, when they needed to get a hold of a bishop, they would go to the stake center that had a phone, or a church building that had a phone, and they'd pray that that bishop would call them because they needed to talk to him. And that's how they communicated. The bishop would be working, most of them were in agriculture, farming and whatnot, ranching, and the bishop would feel an impression to call the stake center. And he'd call, and the stake presidency would be there and say, well, we were praying that you'd call, and this is what we need to do, and blah, 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 blah. So they communicated that way. And I think what our prophet's saying is we have lazy learning now, in that information is so easily accessed, just boom. And kind of what we were talking about right at the beginning. And I think the reason we resonate,
and almost like we're relying less on the Spirit.
Exactly. And I think why we resonate with these older school guys is because they didn't have at their fingertips every quote from C.S. Lewis. They didn't have every scriptural reference.
They couldn't just Google something.
They couldn't just Google something, or they didn't have a staff. They didn't have this. They didn't have that. And they relied so much on the Spirit, in my opinion, that resonates still. Where much of what we hear now from, scholarly people, it's just a collection of just a bunch of information, and it's all at their fingertips and this and that, and it just doesn't feel as good. Just doesn't feel. I don't know. I think you're onto something.
And I think they try so hard to, like they said, bring things more into light, that it's not necessarily in more light. There's not necessarily more transparency.
It's almost just the opposite.
What they're doing now is they're taking excerpts from critics of the church and people that used to write books like Mormon Enigma and No Man Knows My Story, or what is it?
No Man Knows My History.
My History. And
Fawn Brody. Yeah.
And Fawn Brody, and even hardcore critics like what's her name? She's still around.
Oh, they have the ministry.
You know who I'm talking about.
I do.
Well,
you have Sonia Johnson. She was one, but then you have that couple, and I can't remember.
Her husband died.
Yeah, her husband passed.
But anyway, they'll take, and from people that people that left the church in the early days of the church. Who was it that apostatized over cream?
Oh,
gosh, we're getting old and farty.
I know the story. It's not William Law. I can't remember. Anyway,
is it Law? Well,
I don't. I know what you're saying, and he sided with his wife.
In other words, they take second and third hand accounts even and say that's truth.
Yeah.
And they take statements from people that vowed to destroy the church and say, well, they said this and they said that. Some of these modern critics or scholars in the church are doing that and saying that we should believe them more than the credible sources that stayed in the church and
you're absolutely
had
right.
testimonies of the gospel. It's just weird.
It is weird. And I think
it's Satan. It's satanic.
No question about it.
And I apologize for not knowing the names of these.
I know, and I'm the same way, but I know the story. I remember that. Um, you know,
I'm going to Google it while you're talking. I know we don't
yeah,
have much time left, but go ahead.
yeah, okay, yeah. Tell me to shut up if I
No,
need.
no, 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 no. Go ahead.
So when we had James E. Talmage, Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie, these were our scholars that I grew up with. You had Hugh Nibley, and he was kind of an anomaly, and same with Truman Madsen. But the
Thomas B.
scholars,
Marsh. Sorry, Thomas
Thomas
B.
B.
Marsh.
Marsh, you got it. Good job.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
Thomas B.
vowed to
Marsh.
destroy the church, but
Over
yet,
that.
but yet we'll believe a lot of the things he said.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the scholars were apostles. Think of the different perspective that an apostle, a special witness of the power of Christ, would have as he researched and studied versus academia.
Right.
And so we have this real separation now, I think, where you have academia in the church education system and BYU, which is I think separate from CES. I don't even know if they call it CES anymore, but those individuals have been brought up and taught in some of the most liberal, left-leaning places of education around, and it has to have an influence on them. And so I think more and more we have to really, not that what they write is all bad. I'm not saying that, but we have to be very guarded and go by the spirit of what they write, and then we can rely on what the current leadership and apostles and prophets are saying, because we know that's going to be in line, right? That's going to always be in line, where this is very questionable. It could be, or it couldn't be.
And it's very true. The older apostles back in the 20s and 30s, they were scholars.
Yes.
James E. Talmage and Joseph Fielding Smith.
Yeah.
But as we got further, like after the 70s, you had more attorneys and businessmen and doctors and people of the world, which still had the mantle. But it's funny that the scholar that the scriptures talk about men that weren't scholars. Prophets and apostles were never scholars anyway. Look at fishers of men. The apostles of Christ, they weren't scholars. They weren't of the Sanhedrin. He didn't go to the Sadducees and Pharisees and pick his apostles. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's
he went
why
to fishers of men. That's why the mantle is far, far greater than the intellect.
Exactly. And that's why commoners like you and me can study this and get the insights. We don't necessarily have to rely on a scholar to explain things to us.
We're not brainy.
We're not brainy.
But we have the Spirit.
But if we have the Spirit, and that seems to be the pattern, like what you just beautifully said, that the Lord works through, the weak, or the individuals that would rely on the Lord more than their own intellect.
Right.
And so, yeah, very good. Oh man, good stuff.
Brother, thank you so much for
Thank you.
This it's been awesome. And I'm starting to come to terms, and thank you for dragging me out of the house. And I haven't been on here, man. I don't know. I got into a slump. I got into a big slump.
Totally happens. I've gone through them, and I'm going through, a bit of it right now. I just get, I don't know.
Palmer telling me to come out and go get your glove and let's play ball. I love it. And we're not brainy. We're not intellectuals. Even one of the apostles said, I can't see, and we paraphrase, we forget names, but the spirit and the intention is good. But one of the apostles said that a lot of the intellectuals liked, and Kwaku even said this, if you remember, he said they like to teach themselves. They like to.
Ooh, yes. Yeah.
They like to sound all flowery and wordy.
Yeah.
They're very wordy and very intellectual
Yeah.
amongst themselves. I'm not saying that all of them are bad.
Right.
They're not bad people, but they're, for someone that's supposed to be an apologist or a scholar that's trying to build somebody's testimony up, or or uh or tackle someone's uh faith crisis issues, they don't do it in a very simplified way. Sometimes you go, what the heck is he saying?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And the more wordy and the more explanation they have to give, the more of a turnoff it is to me. Like, just tell us in normal terms. That's how Christ spoke. He spoke in normal, everyday understand. And sometimes we say, oh, he used parables so people wouldn't understand. No. He used parables for those simple people that knew the spirit and knew nature, knew what was going on. That's who they understood what he was talking about. But the very educated, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, they're like, what's he talking about? They
Right.
didn't get it. But the commoner did.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Okay.
Hold on. Don't go away. Let me stop
Okay.
this.
All right.